Let's see what Lee Anderson had to say yesterday, because he had rather an interesting exchange with Angela Rayner as well.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Just a few weeks ago from that dispatch box, the Minister for Rural Affairs said that he'd been congratulated by a farmer over the introduction of the inheritance tax. Now, I think this farmer must have been a cannabis farmer, because just yesterday we had 10,000 farmers on Whitehall protesting against this madcap decision. So does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that this decision should be thrown in the trash can along with Rachel from Accounts' CV?
Well, Mr Speaker, he talks about CVs. It's good to see the honourable member doing well on his bench. Once a Labour councillor, then a Tory MP, and now a Reform Chief Whip. Every time he switches party, he gets a promotion. Mr Speaker, I've already outlined what we've done to support our farmers, and we'll continue to support the farmers, and we'll continue to invest in our public services to get Britain back on track.
Again, very funny answer from Angela Rayner, but not an answer to the question, really, because, you know, the farming problem is not going to go away. It was described by Nigel Farage as the beginning the other day, when the 20,000 plus, I don't think it was a lot more than 10,000, turned up in Whitehall with their children, you know, walking around in the right-wing gear, apparently, as it's now called, you know, Barber and Wellies, was a far-right outfit. And so it's not going to go away, this problem.
It's not, and the problem is, I think, that it's going to get worse, because I think what's going to happen is you're going to start to see, you know, farmers go under, and we'll come on in a moment to the numbers, because the numbers are concerning, and BBC Verify, which is supposed to be doing the fact check.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
But I think what's going to happen quite quickly is that if we end up with food shortages because farmers are unable to make ends meet and they have to sell off their farms and we're not able to produce the food that we need at the supermarkets, that's going to lead to shortages of supply, which then in turn, Mike, leads to inflation. And we've already seen inflation.
Inflation's already on the way up.
This was part of the row yesterday. It's on the way up. It's higher than it was. And that means that people aren't going to see that drop in interest rates, which of course is going to help them with their mortgages when they and their disposable income. So actually, you know, this Labour would like to say, well, it's just the farmers. Look at that protest, and that's not who we are, and that's not who we represent. Fine, but actually, this is how it affects other industries, and whether it's a supermarket,
it's part of the foundations, as they keep saying, of the country. But in the Mail's coverage this morning of this BBC bias story, we've got, of course, the BBC Verify, which is an organisation the BBC started up not that long ago, maybe a couple of years ago. I think about 50 or 60 people working there. Mariana Spring is the woman who runs it. She, by bizarre coincidence, lied on her CV as well before she got a job at the BBC. But they're basically the truth-checking unit, they call themselves. And one of the things that put them in the limelight was that Keir Starmer actually said the BBC have checked our figures and they've basically endorsed them, so we know that they must be right. And then it turned out they'd got it wrong.
Yes, so the figure that specifically the Keir Starmer was quoting in the BBC was this idea that this change to inheritance tax for farmers will affect around 500 estates a year. Actually, the Country Land and Business Association claim it's going to hit 70,000 farms by the tax. Now, this would almost go under the radar, except that on Tuesday in Rio de Janeiro, the Prime Minister insisted the vast majority of farmers would be unaffected. And he goes on to say, all of you can check out what that means in terms of the impact. I think the BBC has already done it.
Yes.
It means the vast majority of farmers are unaffected by this. It's just important we keep making that clear. But of course now, the BBC has quietly removed, no fanfare with it, from their Verify section, that claim about it only affecting 500 farms a year.
Funnily enough, the one thing that they don't do, BBC Verify, is ever verify some of the stuff that the BBC does about what's happening in Gaza and Israel, because quite often the BBC gets criticised for being biased towards Hamas and not calling Hamas a terrorist organisation and all the rest of it. BBC Verify don't go anywhere near that, strangely enough.
And the whole point of BBC Verify, and the reason it was set up, was to try and ensure that trust in the BBC is kept.
No, it wasn't. No, it was set up so that they could criticise other media outlets and have a go at people like us and say, well, that's not right. But they don't.
What I was going to say was it hasn't been kept. If you're fact-checking the fact-checkers, then it clearly hasn't been. But I think we're arguing the same point, Mike.
She did all these investigations early on into what she called right-wing organisations. You know, it wasn't anything to do with...
Mariana Spring. Sorry, I was separating... Look, Mariana Spring Yeah.
I mean, it's a complete waste of public money, in my view.
But Verify was that the idea is that it has this, puts this sort of stardust of like, look, we're the BBC, and all of our information could be, you know, is above board, it's all legit, and it's absolutely fine. But then if
except
you've got, except it isn't, if they're then quietly removing, because when a newspaper makes a mistake, you could go to page 2 of the Mail, you could go to page 2 of the Times,
and they correct it.
And they correct it, and you can sit, you know where to look in your daily newspaper if there's a mistake being made and you want to check it, and you can write in and you can make your change, and then you can see the mistake. Even the Guardian does it sometimes, but if the BBC aren't admitting to the mistake, then it becomes very opaque, doesn't it?
And we know they're not mistakes that they make; they're deliberate mistakes.
Often, well, certainly,
they know exactly what they're doing.